Welcome everybody. This was the quietest little leading up to a talk I've ever heard in here. It's usually no one listens and they're all getting food, so kudos to all of you. I'm David Hart, I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you here. There have been some slides going by, and the one I want to really call attention to is the fact that on Thursday at 2 o'clock, Senator Mitchell will be giving a talk over in Hach Auditorium. Pretty big deal if you want a view of kind of where we are in the state of our democracy. He's a widely admired leader in Maine, in the nation as the former Senate Majority Leader, and in the world, for example, chairing the Northern Ireland peace process. So if you want to go to that, all you have to do is get tickets. They're free, but you go online and get them. But I also wanted to let students in the audience, some of you have already heard this, know that, and this is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Senator Mitchell is going to meet with students here after the lecture at 3:30. We'll figure out which space depending on exactly how things go. If you're interested in that, all you have to do is email Ruth Hallsworth in the Mitchell Center. We are keeping track of who's going to be there so we can figure out how to make it work. I can tell you I've had the pleasure of being in those meetings a few times, and it's really fascinating. He's deeply interested in fact, the talk he's going to give includes some comments from him about the role that students and faculty can play working with local communities on these really important issues about what's the current state of our democracy and what can we do to strengthen it. So, if you've been watching these things go by, there's various other things coming up. No talk next Monday because it's fall break, but 2 weeks from now, our colleague Gail Zaleski, who's a member of the Mitchell Center and now the head of Maine Sea Grant, will be giving a talk with a very clever title, Let's Get Engaged. I will just say that that was one from Bree Berry in the back. Nice work, Bree. And then one last thing that's been going around is that almost every semester we reserve one of these hour-long slots from 3 to 4 for students to do what we call lightning talks. So those are real short, real jazzy. You talk about what you're doing, the questions you're asking, what you've learned so far, the reason you haven't made more progress, anything you want to talk about. So if you're interested in that, and they tend to be this really cool mix of students, but sometimes even standing back from a distance, you realize some of the students who are doing different things have a lot in common. They haven't even met each other yet. So it's a fun way to kind of see the wide range of sustainability work that's going on. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up, and abstracts are due on October 19th. So I think that's, 2 weeks from this Friday? Yeah. Okay. So it's a pleasure to welcome Sarah and Bryce Hach to the Mitchell Center today. I guess I sort of heard about them from a number of sources, and it mostly just made me interested in meeting them, so I'm already where I want to be on this. Fascinating background. They met in grad school at Carnegie Mellon in Western Pennsylvania, if you don't know that institute, great institution. They both have master's degrees in public policy and management. But I guess not only did they fall in love with each other, but within about a year of being married, they fell in love with Maine, which, and they didn't just fall in love with Maine, they moved here in the middle of winter. And even I didn't have the courage to do that, so credit to you. Really, I haven't heard all their stories yet, but they have different undergraduate backgrounds. Sarah with an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Minnesota. Bryce with an undergraduate degree in history from Colorado College. Did I do that right? And we've had Jane Lubchenco here before from Colorado College. She was the head of NOAA during Obama's administration, or the first term of Obama's administration. So, good place to go. Sarah, while she was doing some of her work with Richard Florida on economic development issues, that's someone who inspired some of the work we did at the Mitchell Center a number of years ago on community and economic development. Worked on poverty issues in Colorado as the director of community programs for a private foundation and a program called Bridges Out of Poverty. Worked for Colorado State University on economic development. And in Maine, one of the things that's really been interesting to see is something called Focus Maine. If you Google it, they got a great website that's been about how you kind of grow Maine's economy in various kind of where we're well suited to really have an advantage in industries like agriculture, aquaculture, and biopharmaceuticals. Bryce, back in Colorado, led a nonprofit focused on homelessness, and in Maine, he's done a bunch of things. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Southern Maine, teaching about nonprofits and public management. Director of development for Maine Audubon, where we have a lot of close colleagues. And on the board of directors for GrowSmart Maine, we had Nancy Smith here back in the spring to talk about GrowSmart's work. So last September, not just the previous month, but the previous year, you launched Maine Food for Thought. And you're going to hear all about that, so I won't say anything there. But what was interesting to me is how many connections there are between what they're trying to do in that really innovative space and all the work that's going on in food systems, linked to the Mitchell Center and more broadly the University of Maine. When I was trying to quickly summarize some of the connections, I ended up sending Sarah, somewhat rudely I guess, like 10 different links to all the projects going on with Honors College, pollination security in blueberries, artisanal cheese, farm to institution food waste. So a lot of connections that I think you'll see as you go through this that are probably even telling us that we should look for new ways, additional ways to collaborate with folks like them. So please welcome me in joining them.
Okay, great. All right, well, yeah, first of all, Bryce and I, we just really want to thank David Hart and Ruth Halsworth and Linda Silka for all of their work together to bring us here to participate in this sustainability talk. We're very much looking forward to this. So, David covered a lot in our backgrounds. Even more exciting, we met in statistics class in graduate school. It doesn't get any more exciting than that. So, and yeah, as David said, you know, we'd always lived somewhere for school or for a job, and we'd been in Colorado for about 8 years. And Bryce and I have always really liked to work on different positions that take kind of a collective impact model and a systems level approach to things. So we were kind of scanning the country of sort of where we wanted to move. Our daughter was 4 at the time. We'd come out to Maine on our first anniversary, fell in love with it, and it had always been in the back of our mind those 8 years. So a little bit unlike us, we like made a big Excel spreadsheet of all these things we were looking for. But you know, Maine hit a lot of the marks in terms of natural amenities, cultural amenities, great public schools, but still access to major metropolitan areas. So we left our positions and we moved here, right about January 1st of 2013. And we started off working in the conservation field and economic development here in Maine. And really, we'd always been looking for an opportunity to kind of do something together and figure out how to kind of take that systems level collective impact model to a business. And so we kind of blended our backgrounds, and the economic development project I was on, as David mentioned, was focused on agriculture and aquaculture, and for Maine to become a renowned producer of high quality traceable foods. And with Bryce's conservation and nonprofit background, we merged that together and we launched Maine Food for Thought on June 5th of this year.
Great. And when we first started exploring this as a business idea, we really had absolutely zero experience at all in food tourism. And so we met with a global food tourism guru in Chicago who was heading up the Chicago Food Planet. And food tourism is probably about a 15, 20-year industry in total. And there are now hundreds of food tours, both domestically and internationally. And we really wanted to bank on that collective experience, that have to reinvent the wheel here in terms of operations, in terms of management, along some of the nuts and bolts of what goes into a food tour. But I think at the same time, we really had no interest in just doing a food tour for its own sake. There's a lot of food tours that really kind of provide food and maybe a couple of interesting kind of highlighted points, or in terms of architecture, or in terms of maybe an interesting statue, a little bit of history. And those are great, and we wouldn't want to take anything away from that. But I think we really, at the end of the day, I think kind of given our experience in economic development and education and social services and environmental conservation, and recognizing that the Maine food system has its tendrils in all of these different areas, which we cared so much about, that we ultimately really wanted to use a food tour as really a vehicle to really help explain the Maine food system. And we really wanted it to be an experience where people would go on the tour, of course have some great food, but really selectively try to create items that would really help tell people about locally sourced food, the values of sustainability, and hopefully make an more intentional consumer in the process. And that was really the driving force behind us really wanting to do this tour.
So as we kind of developed our mission and vision, it was really important for us to be a social enterprise business, which we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation. But as Bryce was mentioning, we wanted to reveal the distinctive stories of Maine's unique food system, the path of food travels from land to sea to fork, and its impact on both the people, the environment, and local economies. But we had a bigger vision. Right now, a lot of our guests, 3/4 of them, are from out of the state. We're hoping to have more local people take the tour as well. But, we envision a future where people have a more intimate connection to their food decisions and a sense of responsibility for those food relationships in a sustainable way within their communities. So we kind of have a bigger vision to just a food tour. Again, it's just kind of a vehicle to highlight these stories.
Yeah, maybe just one other point I would add to that is that, I know when I was a little kid, words like locally sourced, traceability, sustainable weren't words that were thrown around that often, and today they increasingly seem to be all around us. And I think that they speak to an increased awareness and responsibility to our actions, the impact they have on the people and the environment we interact with, both for today and for tomorrow. I think in many ways, these words say we don't just vote when we're in a ballot box, but we vote through the everyday decisions that we make, from the cars that we drive, the clothes that we wear, how we landscape our yards, but that nowhere are these decisions more magnified or intimate than with what we literally put in our bodies. And I think that food really then became a wonderful, again, vehicle to really get into these much bigger issues, which we're going to be touching on.
So we had kind of several people that were thought leaders that kind of helped us guide the structuring of our business. This is Dan Barber. He is a chef in Manhattan of a restaurant, and also he is a chef at Blue Hill at Stone Farms, and they really use a lot of local ingredients. Stone Farms is a nonprofit and an education center, and he really has a philosophy of food that focuses on pleasure and thoughtful conversation, which we thought was a great hybrid for our business as well. And he really speaks a lot about where the food on your plate comes from and sort of those unseen forces that drive what we eat. So he kind of pursues sort of strategies and reasons behind the food that we grow and we eat. So we think this is a great quote here that chefs are not, chefs are really actually influencers in this day and age, that it's not just about, the presentation and the culinary flavors, but also their impacts ecologically as well.
In fact, I kind of start every tour with a quote by Dan Barber, and it says that this is what cuisine really is: the way a region's unique ecological relationships and place-specific advantages and challenges become manifested through delicious food. And I think it's just a wonderful epitaph that really gets people to kind of understand a little bit about kind of what the angle is on the tour that we're about to partake on. And I think another kind of thought leader that we really had was a gentleman named Simon Sinek, and he's pretty well known. And I think a lot of times businesses or organizations really kind of start off with what is it that we do, and that's really kind of the opening priority around how to make decisions for a business or an organization. And I think what he was really showing was that the most profound organizations, the most profound leaders don't start with the what, they start with the why. That, again, use the quote that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And he uses some interesting examples like Apple computers, which really start with the premise of that everything we do, we believe in changing the status quo, into thinking differently. And that's the why behind everything. And that after that, kind of how we do it then is that we create beautifully created and crafted products that are user-friendly. And the what is, we just so happen to make computers. We like to buy one because we really want to test that status quo. Another example is that he uses is Martin Luther King when he was on the March to Washington. And when he was speaking, he didn't lay out, okay, here's my 5-point plan for the civil rights movement. He really started with, I have a dream. And that was the why that undergirded all of the activity that went on from there. And that we really have this, not that we're trying to compare ourselves in any way, shape, or form, either to Apple or to Martin Luther King, but that we really were coming at this food tour not with the idea that we just want to do a food tour or that we just want to have a really successful food tour. Instead, we really are at the heart really trying to educate people to be a more intentional consumer about the food they eat and its implications ecologically, economically, and socially on the communities in which they live, and that this tour will help to hopefully curb some of that thinking and ultimately some of the actions that go on as it relates to the decisions that people make about the food that they put on their plate. And again, I think in that same spirit with Simon Sinek was really an undergirding motivation for us in terms of what we wanted to accomplish with the tour itself. And so with the tour that we have is that, again, it's around really trying to tell the story of locally and sustainably sourced food. And I think there's a number of virtues associated with locally and sustainably sourced food. One, and probably many of you know some of these details already, but that one is that locally and sustainably sourced food typically has received less chemicals, by which I mean herbicides, pesticides, additives, preservatives that negatively affect our health, which then collectively create runoff that negatively affect our public health. The second is that locally sourced food preserves open spaces and working landscapes, conserving fertile soil, protecting water sources, and sequestering carbon. And this isn't even considering the smaller amounts of carbon emissions associated with shorter distribution lines. We looked at a study from the Center for Urban Education, Sustainable Agriculture that showed that the average American meal had traveled 1,500 miles to get to the plate, which is a greater distance than a family takes when they go away on vacation. And of course, that's every individual meal. And then here in Maine, we have some inherent advantages and disadvantages for finding great locally sustainably sourced food. The advantages is that we can draw from the Gulf of Maine on one side and great farms on the other. If we were, say, in Omaha, Nebraska, another great ag state, but it would be hard to really talk about great seafood that's locally sourced, and that we can really draw from both very, very easily. A challenge, however, is that being as far north as we are means we have very short growing seasons. And so a lot of our chefs that are on our tour are constantly pivoting their menu to get what is fresh at that exact moment. And that also takes a fair amount of coordination, collaboration, and communication with farmers and fisheries to really bring all this to bear in short order. And I think also in addressing some of those place-specific limitations like the short growing season, really want to celebrate the innovations that are being made in our state. Things like energy-efficient greenhouses and new technologies in hydroponics, even things like grow-at-home mushroom kits that are really helping farms and fisheries and ultimately restaurants to really spread the growing season out beyond maybe what a generation or two would have been a much greater limiting factor. I think we also just very serendipitously came into this is that Portland has a reputation as a great restaurant city, as a great food city. And that just about a month and a half, 2 months after we started, Bon Appetit named Portland the 2018 Maine Restaurant City of the Year. And that's pretty profound given the fact that it's a city of only 67,000. Metro area 240, but within that city of 67,000, there's 412 restaurants. Which is pretty phenomenal. And so we were going to get restaurants that weren't just a haphazard allotment among those 412. We really were being very selective about those that in so many ways have gone beyond their bottom line to provide locally and sustainably sourced food. And that we would really be trying to highlight all of the work and all of the diligence that goes into that process, and through that, really the farms, the fisheries, all the connection points that is made from its original source to the plate, and really being able to bring all of these different aspects to bear. Really that systems level understanding and the sustainability that goes with that. And so we also didn't just partner exclusively with the restaurants. It started there, but it certainly didn't end there. We also were connecting with about 20 different research, education, and nonprofit organizations around the state, as well as meeting with the farmers, meeting with the fisheries, hearing their stories, the challenges, the opportunities, the innovations that they're a part of, making statewide visits to Washington County, Aroostook County, locally, and really understanding the flavor, the challenges, again, that are going on across the state, and really trying to bring all of that narrative into our tour, and even running drafts of the script material by these organizations, really making sure that we are a nexus point for really the knowledge capital that exists across the state of Maine, and really making it accessible to a variety of different audiences as they eat really high quality food. And I think as we go through the tour, we also touch on a lot of things through the prism, through the lens of food, like climate change, like immigration, like challenges between urban communities versus rural communities. Even things like poverty, things that have much greater range than maybe just the traditional pure foodie would have an interest in, and really trying to capture and touch on a lot of different interests that really kind of funnel through the lens of food that we can really touch on as we go through the course of this tour.
So as Bryce was touching on, we have a number of different partners and customers. So we are partnered with the restaurants. We're partnered with all the nonprofits that we mentioned on our website that are in partnership with us, all of the harvesters, the growers, and obviously the customers that take our tour. And so for those other constituent groups to be partnered with us, I think they see that we're helping to elevate their brand awareness. Restaurants can only tell so much on their menu and through their waitstaff when people come into their establishment. And we've heard from them that they love the idea that every day there's a group of people coming in and understanding their commitment and how they're part of a broader food system, and how their commitment to source locally, how that has impact on people's livelihoods throughout the whole state. Same thing with nonprofits. We're partnered with Gulf of Maine Research Institute, Maine Farmland Trust. Full Plates, Full Potential is a nonprofit that addresses childhood hunger. 1 in 5 Maine students is hungry and qualifies for free or reduced lunches in schools. And so we really shine a light on them in our script and hope that on our website people go and learn a little bit more about them. And same with the growers and harvesters. We have a map on our tour that also highlights them. You can go on our website to learn more a little bit about them. So we're just kind of another doorway for new customers, new donors. We've had some national media. We've been in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Maine Biz, some other national publications. And so it's just a way to spotlight Maine, since I work in economic development in this way, that yes, we're focused on one sector here, but it's kind of showing that innovation that's really occurring in Maine and kind of helping to put them on the map in a positive light than some other stories that might come out around demographics, other things that we're certainly needing to address. But it's just nice to kind of show that innovation in this sector. So.
Yeah. And maybe just one last point is that I think with these restaurants really are walking the walk for locally sustainably sourced food, and would admittedly be more profitable if they were just trying to get broader bulk wholesale food. And there really wasn't, frankly, a narrative for them to tell that story. The menu can't tell that story. The waitstaff can't tell that story. So they really kind of saw us as a natural extension and mouthpiece for their own mission. And really being able to communicate something which otherwise there really wasn't an opportunity to speak for. And we can really maybe fill in that role, if you will, in helping to extend the great work that goes on behind the scenes that ultimately the food is ultimately the end result of.
We also see our tours trying to meet the demand for authenticity and sustainability. So authenticity, as you can see, is kind of the number one culinary characteristic that food lovers seek while traveling. And so what we try to do during our tour is that about half of our restaurants are not open over the lunch hour. So when you go in, you really get a behind the scenes look. You're seeing deliveries being made. You're seeing food prep. You're seeing actually what happens before you go to that white tablecloth restaurant, and chefs come out and they talk to guests and you can ask questions. So, we're really trying, and we're serving all, locally sourced, harvested foods. So we really try to hit that in that first bullet. And the second is that, traceability is not a fad that's going away. People want to know where their food is coming from. They want to trace it back through the supply chain. And obviously, the closer they are to the source, the more they feel a level of comfort in the food that they're putting into their bodies. And so we really see ourselves as this kind of, I don't know if you want to call it third-party authenticator, nexus point, honest broker of that intellectual capital. We're not the experts in this. That's why we've taken several months before we launch this, that we meet with the farmers, we meet with the fisherwomen, the fishermen, we meet with the nonprofits, the education organization. We're providing data and scientific research that is coming from other entities, and they're also a way to help us if people have any questions that we can't answer, and just to be a resource in that. But we really try to act like a sponge when we meet all of them, to absorb this information, to really understand Maine's advantages, challenges, and innovation in this state, and be able to relay it in a way that is interesting and consumable. I have to admit, one concern that Bryce and I had when we launched this was, I think our first script was pretty policy heavy, and people were kind of like, are people going to want to take this tour, on vacation or a date outing or something with their friend? And we've really worked hard on that to kind of blend both that enjoyment of food and being in a social situation, which I think allows people to hear different topics around climate change and food insecurity and kind of be in community together. So we really do try to, blend that so that they really are walking away with an education, but it's also, enjoyable to them as well. And I think that, as Bryce was saying, that these issues carry interest for people well beyond the foodie scene. There could be someone who signed up for the tour that's really into, top culinary food, and they could be bringing someone that doesn't really know why they're going on this tour. Maybe this isn't their interest, but they're going to hear these topics that are in all of our daily lives that we're hearing about, that everyone is working on. And so it's just kind of that connection point, whether they're local or from another state, to hear that. And I think that we really are trying to do what also the Mitchell Center is doing, which is that intersection of economic, social, and the environment. We're trying to hit all of those.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I mean, just as an example, on the fifth stop on our tour, we go to this restaurant called Eastender, and then we provide a lobster melt. But with that lobster, which is a great food item unto itself, we talk about climate change and the fact that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the ocean water, and that how we've seen over the last 50 years. The epicenter for lobster has shifted from southern New England to northern New England. And what are those implications as we set that trajectory further out into the future? And then, and talk about the fact that with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute studies that have shown that with the number of temperature sensors out in the Gulf of Maine, where if the temperature rises stays above a certain threshold point over a 24-hour period, that's considered a summer day in the Gulf of Maine. And that since 1982, the number of days that are above that threshold point have grown by 2 to 3 days a year. And then accumulatively, meaning that the Gulf of Maine, in terms of temperature, the summer is twice as long as it was in the early 1980s. And what are the implications for that? Obviously for the lobster that we're eating, but also as we talk about bigger picture issues in terms of marine ecosystems in the Gulf of Maine. So even as we're eating an item, we're using it, again, as a stepping stone to really talk about these much bigger issues that the food kind of purposefully gives us a chance to talk about. We even start off with an empty bowl and say, when I first moved here, I had my very first plate of Maine shrimp and how much I love Maine shrimp. But very soon thereafter, a moratorium was placed because the real part of it was over shrimping, but also part of it was that the Gulf of Maine is on the southern edge of its native range, and with warming ocean temperatures, they're migrating further northward. And so really trying to provide a sense of a connection point between the food itself and these bigger issues that we're grappling with both in food and also maybe even more generally in the state of Maine. And so I don't know if you read the entire quote here, but this is a great quote here by Ilma Lopez, who's a co-owner and head chef at Piccolo, and it really kind of underscores the real commitment that this restaurant has taken to address food insecurity in our state. As Sarah was saying, we have the 7th highest rate of food insecurity in the United States, the highest in New England. and that there's this real irony in the sense that Portland and Maine generally are kind of thought of as these food destinations, and yet at the same time are also a state with high food insecurity itself. And that how do we kind of reconcile some of these issues, and that and even with kind of the different kind of social classes and how they look at food differently, and how with those who are poor, it's the big consideration in terms of engagement with food is there enough food to eat? And then typically in the middle class, the key question is, does the food taste good? And in the upper class, the key question is, how is the food presented? And so here we're having really well presented food, and yet at the same time we're talking about those who don't have enough food. So we really are trying to span the spectrum in terms of the relationship that people in our state have with food, and hopefully get people to think a little bit more intentionally about what that relationship means for them as individuals. And then again, really trying to highlight those restaurants that have really done a great job in terms of addressing food insecurity. So example here with Piccolo, what they do is they really have taken proceeds from items listed on their menu, and they host community events, generating dollars that are going directly to the nonprofits that work with families and individuals dealing with food insecurity, recognizing that a single dollar can be stretched as far as providing 10 meals to a Mainer in need, and what that really can mean, and also where are the chinks in the distribution chain, so that people who need food and where food is available, and how can we connect the dots. And this is definitely a restaurant that really does that very well. And I think we can also look at some of our other restaurant partners who have really reached out to, say, the farmer community, and hosting like an annual Farmers Appreciation Dinner, generating resources and dollars that go into the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, or otherwise known as MOFGA, and really trying to kind of elevate places that have really showed a real commitment, not just to what they're putting on the table and what the great work that's going on in the kitchen, but also that commitment to the broader Maine food system itself. And then I think as we kind of look to the future here, we're really trying to find ways that we can kind of take this model and make it more applicable to a broader network of individuals and of communities. Because we realize that, I mean, admittedly, probably the median age for those who go on our tour is probably high 50s, low 60s. And we realize that if we really want to really extend our mission, we have to be touching the next generation. And so just in the last couple of weeks, we've really reached out and had some meetings with the Portland School District, and trying to get some of their students to go on the tour so they can get this experience, get that exposure. Also wanting to host community events where we can really kind of generate a bigger buzz, maybe partner with the local Chamber of Commerce and with other organizations, that we can really get the word out, get to those who certainly go well beyond our choir, so that they're really thinking thoughtfully about the Maine food system as well. The picture there down below, when Sarah and I went off to Washington County, to Wyman's Farm up in Cherryfield, and Wyman's Farm, one of the largest blueberry farms here in the state, and we were checking out their campus. They have all these different rows of bunkhouses where migrant workers are residing during the time they're working on the harvest. And then at the close of the harvest, the migrant workers from different countries form soccer teams and compete in a soccer tournament. There's a soccer field right there in the middle of their campus for the Wyman's Cup. And so, we had a chance to take our daughter up to watch the Wyman's Cup final. And let's just say the Honduras team is definitely the team to beat up there.
So just a little bit of a recap. Our season is going to go until November 17th. Demand has certainly exceeded supply. We've been sold out for probably 3.5 months, basically our entire season since we launched, but there are still some spots available in October and November. And yeah, I mean, we get calls all the time for people wanting to take it, wanting to see where we're going to kind of go next on this. One pleasant surprise is that TripAdvisor, as we all know, is, for better or for worse, the place where everyone goes and leaves their reviews. And we are just thrilled that in the first 2 months we moved to the #1 tour. And I think it's honestly because a lot of people feel really motivated to share their experiences. I feel like that a lot of the reviews, they're capturing exactly what we were hoping. They're capturing the educational piece, that they want to go back and visit these restaurants, that they wish maybe there was a food tour in their hometown that would explain their regional food system. And so I think that, we're just really getting a lot of great comments on that, and then kind of mentioned the different media. And then I think that something else too, I'd encourage you, I'm going to snap a photo at the end because now we're all about Instagram, but our Instagram feed is really not very much about our business. I think there's maybe 2 shots of all of our posts that even capture the tour. We really try to, again, talk about these other broader issues. So we were just at an event yesterday for Full Plates, Full Potential. Again, they're talking about how there are about 84,000 students in Maine who are hungry and qualify for these different federal programs. And I know that sounds like a really large number, but they were saying, that Texas, has like 1.2 million. And sometimes we're in a state, and I'm sure you feel this being a part of the Mitchell Center, is that you can work on these issues. A lot of the hunger issues that schools are dealing with, because there is federal money to provide free and reduced lunches to school, but it's that kind of stigma and how do you get families to sign up for this. They've thought of all kinds of new ways. That there was one school, I believe up in Aroostook County, that was just struggling with getting people to sign up, and there was like 20% participation, and they figured out that if they brought like the morning breakfast, which is really what a lot of kids aren't having before they come to school, into the classroom, it went up to like 90%, because you don't know who is getting that subsidized. You don't know who's paying for that. And then they kind of charged the people attending to say, do you know that rate in your school system? In the Portland Public Schools, it's 56%. And to charge people to think about that and think about what can you do, or what if we didn't even need kids to fill out these forms? What if there was a way when we broke out per price per child, what if a community took that on to make sure that all kids knew that they were eating food? Because these are gut-wrenching stories, kids are leaving on Friday and eating as much as they can, and many of them are just rushing in to get breakfast on Monday because they have not eaten over the weekend. And I'm going off a bit on a tangent because I feel a bit passionate about this issue, but it's just something that, again, we just try to bring awareness to, and we'll get into that on the next slide of kind of where we plan to go next on this.
All right, yeah, so this first year we're providing 5 tours a week, 1 tour a day, Tuesday through Saturday, and we're just doing the one product. We really wanted to keep things kind of confined and defined this first season as we kind of learn the ropes ourselves, frankly. But we'll take a momentary pause in mid-November, and then we'll start up again in early April. Use that time to really kind of put our pieces together to really have kind of ramp things up a little bit in 2019. So we'll continue to have our signature tour, kind of our Land, Sea, Fork tour, but we'll probably do it more on a seasonal basis, meaning that we'll try to have a tour that's really kind of more of a reflection of, say, spring or summer, and then maybe and the food items that are really unique at that time of the year, and then we'll have maybe a separate tour like in the fall, maybe into the early winter, that really reflects food that is really harvested at that time of the year. So it's really trying to get at the seasonality and what's really what's really fresh at that specific moment. And then also looking at maybe doing one that also includes like drink pairings with Maine grains, and maybe even things like blueberry wine, other things that really kind of capture that aspect. And I think there are also some subject areas that we haven't been able to really delve into. One of them is food waste, which is a very, very important issue. Upwards to 40% of the food that is produced in this country goes uneaten, and almost 90% of that lands up in a landfill. In fact, there was a study that showed that if you took all of the uneaten food in the world, the carbon footprint would be the 3rd largest country after China and the United States on its own. So this is a very, very huge issue, and certainly when you're talking about restaurants that really are providing a very high quality item, obviously where the visual picture of the food is very, very important. And admittedly, I can't tell you how many people take photos of the food items on our tour. It's like paparazzi. It's well photographed food, But when you're when that is a high component, that means there's that much more food that typically is also going to get wasted that doesn't meet that visual standard. And so those are some issues that we want to be tapping into, as well as multi-day tours, which allow us perhaps to go into farms, into fisheries, and more kind of hole-in-the-wall places that would allow us to get deeper dive into some of the issues we really just kind of touch on in this first year's tour. And then also, many times when people are on the tours who are traveling from other parts of the country, they say, you know what, there's nothing like this where we live. And is there a way that we might be able to take our model and make it accessible and replicable and unique to different communities around the country? So I think that's something that we're kind of brainstorming through right now. And also just continue to, you know, shine a light and connect with the intellectual capital that exists in the state around food. You know, the nonprofits, the growers, the harvesters, the producers. All of them play such critical roles individually and in terms of the overall sustainability for food in our state. We really want to continue to shine a light on that and take a deeper dive into really what's going on out there as it relates to Maine Food and all the different people that are part of it. And so I think people want to feel like they can be a part of a solution. A lot of times these bigger, huger issues, you know, poverty, climate change, these are all macro issues, and I think it's difficult a lot of times for people to feel like, well, what can I do to feel like I'm a part of the solution? And what we want to do is provide an on-ramp that's accessible for people so that they can go ahead and do that. And that's something that's really important to us, and so that's something we'll continue to look at. You know, and so we'd love to see you on a tour, and we seek to create change, literally one forkful at a time. And then with that, just want to thank all of you.
Well, the final question is actually, we'd like to know what you would like to see on a tour.
Yep. Yep.
Or any questions you have.
Yep.
Plenty of time for questions and conversation.
Yeah. Snap my Instagram.
So, well, hi, Mark. Great job. Nice things you're doing. So, my question is going to be about traceability and what you're doing to, in fact, understand it. So, remember us were at Food and Ag conference this summer, had the opportunity to go to presentations of 3 food critics, national reputation food critics, and one of the writers did an exposition of the problems in local food with respect to restaurants. And what she was arguing was that local wasn't local in the restaurants, that the traceability was a huge problem. So have you found that? Do you take action to enforce it?
Really good question.
Yeah, you know, I think that Maine, we're in a unique situation here where I think a lot of these restaurants have direct relationships with these farmers. There's very few situations where there's like a middle sort of producer delivering that. So I think that are you talking about more just is the food really local, or it's being from a food safety standpoint able to be traced back to a specific animal or plot of land? But I think that in Maine, it's that traceability story is a little bit much easier to track than some other places I would envision. I mean, I think that that's why Maine has such a brand of quality food, is because I just feel like that there's just such a market of, like, you know, directly caught, brought right into the restaurant. I mean, you think all those restaurants, just Portland on the Wharf, I mean, literally they are like bringing that right into, you know, those restaurants. So I think that it's easy from a restaurant standpoint here, I think, to be able to do that probably more than some other places where we're talking about like a greenwashing of, you know, farm to table and, you know, this food is really traced. I think there's probably a lot of that going on of people claiming different things that aren't necessarily maybe the case. But there's probably, you're right, more to investigate within that for that question.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that is a lot of our chefs literally go to the farmers markets themselves, right, in the city, and they have direct relationships with the farms that are, you know, within a relatively short distance, and we have and also chefs that won't even provide food unless they've had a direct contact with the fishermen or the fisherwomen directly themselves. And so we've kind of done some homework to really know that these are places that truly do walk the walk. But I think to Sarah's point around greenwashing, I mean, I think that, you know, locally sustainably sourced isn't just a good idea, it's also a great brand. It's also great branding. And so you'll see, like, Subway or Quiznos saying, come here and have, great locally sourced food. And, admittedly, a lot of our chefs talk about how, on one hand, that's nice that they're speaking that way because it's something they care about, but they're really diluting the very thing that they care most about in the process. And so I think anytime something becomes cachet, becomes popular, it becomes easy to use that term in a number of different ways that might go well beyond its original intention. And so it causes us to make sure that we're doing our diligence to make sure that the restaurants that are on the tour are really doing that on a day in, day out basis. And I mean, to Sarah's point about not having a middleman, when we have restaurants that literally having farmers dropping off cheese, produce, and other goods right there at the restaurant with dirt still in their fingernails, and we have a restaurant that has a beehive on the top above the restaurant where they get locally sourced honey, and and then a greenhouse that they have in the basement right underneath the restaurant itself. So it does require a certain degree of diligence, and admittedly, these restaurants would all be more profitable if they went with with more wholesale food. And so, in some ways, we are trying to celebrate that commitment because it's against their bottom line. But the footprint that they're creating, in terms of carbon footprint, is certainly much better. And the commitment that they're showing to these much bigger issues is certainly something we feel is worthy of communicating.
And there is an encouragement to people that take the tour that have asked that question about how to investigate more about the food that they're eating in their own community.
Yeah, we certainly encourage people, to Sarah's point, to ask questions. After they're done with the tour. When you're at your grocery store, or when you're at a restaurant, to ask, where is your food sourced from? What's the story behind the plate? And if they can't answer that question, that's probably a bit of a red flag. I think if more customers are asking those questions, then I think that creates market shifts that reflect that demand. And so we're trying to do in our own small little way is to kind of put a seed in people's head about being a little bit more critical and concerned consumer that hopefully will have a broader sweeping effect, multiplier effect down the road.
That's an interesting question, though. And they do this chef summit every year. It starts in Portland. It goes to Sunday River, and they're always looking for different topics for chefs to comment on. So I've made a note of that because I think that's an interesting topic that I think because people attend, whether they're in the food industry, consumers, and that's an interesting question. So I have it done.
Yes, please.
I was wondering, when you're picking these restaurants and you're picking the meal that they try at the restaurant, do you take into account the state of the population being eaten? Because I know from many restaurants' perspective, rare is good for them. They think that that's something that a customer will go there to try, but that rare could be a threatened or endangered species. So I wasn't sure if you yourselves do research into the things that are being eaten to see
Yeah.
how the population
Oh.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, very
You
much
can
so.
start.
Yeah. When we go to our first restaurant, because our first two stops really more of a focus on farms and agriculture, then we kind of pivot to more of what's going on in the Gulf of Maine and with seafood. And we really start off by talking about the virtues of sustainably caught fish in aquaculture. And we only try to provide food that really is meeting those standards. We even talk about the fact that there's a lot of fish in the Gulf of Maine that's underfished. Mackerel, pollock, redfish, whiting, dogfish that is kind of underloved, and we even celebrate organizations who are trying to create markets for underloved seafood in restaurants and grocery stores. And even talk about the fact that a lot of people love to eat Chilean sea bass. But it wasn't that long ago. It had an entirely different name. It was the Patagonian toothfish, and nobody wanted to eat it. But then suddenly it became, wow, this sounds like a good food item. So it's about how do you create branding around sustainably sourced fish that creates a whole different kind of mindset around it that then people want to eat it, and then we're putting a little less heat on those seafood items which are a little bit more threatened. So we definitely talk about it, and we certainly talk about sustainable aquaculture as well, and all of those virtues as they relate to the food system. So you hit on an important subject, and it's certainly something that we really pay close attention to.
And even a twist on that, what I'd say, in addition to the sustainable seafood and what we're serving, is that I wouldn't even say that we're serving these restaurants signature items by any means. You know, I mean, in all fairness, some of these restaurants, I mean, if they were plating their best food or what they wanted to showcase, what they wanted to for people to come back, they'd probably serve something else. I mean, we go to Evo Kitchen and Bar. He won recently the Chopped competition. They have amazing food there. You know what we serve there? We serve potatoes. That he does a Mediterranean,
A really rare item.
with a Mediterranean spin on that, so we can tell that urban rural story. We can tell the story of Maine's #1 crop in a rustic county, and that's not his. It's a wonderful dish, but it's not like we're trying to serve the best of the best. We're trying to serve their culinary talents on these food items that Maine is, you know, iconic for, or areas that they don't know that we're having a real presence in aquaculture. I think that Maine could really become a leader in aquaculture with the different research and our access to cold, clean water. And so, you know, we serve these beautiful Bangs Island mussels. If you've never had them, they're like the largest, meatiest mussels around. And yeah, so
And they're
anyway.
sourced 10 miles from the restaurant, and incredibly sustainably sourced. And it's multi-trophic aquaculture, so you have both kelp and oyster and the mussels. So it really creates more of an ecosystem effect and a much more sustainable way about doing aquaculture. And we try to highlight all of these different variables in the food items that we're trying to present. So it's a really good point, really good question. Yes, please.
You talked about maybe like people want to copy the business model, or like, would you guys be interested in expanding to new cities on your own, or like what would be another city that you'd possibly like that might work with this business model?
I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit. I think where we want to make sure we're careful is we're not interested in doing any kind of like franchise or something like that. But how could we reach a point in the business that it's stable for us in Maine, that would free up our time to go and do some consulting in other communities that would be interested in doing that.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a model that seems a little bit more interesting to us than just kind of taking it all and just kind of cookie cutter placing it.
Now it's Ohio, food for thought.
Yeah, but in terms of a place, I mean, I can't get over the number of people from all over. I mean, places you wouldn't even imagine that just want to tell that story about their community, and it would be different depending on what it is. So.
No, but I think our vision, you know, is that a future where people feel an intimate relationship to their food. We don't want people, you know, coming up to Maine, having this great experience, then going right back to, you know, Delaware or St. Louis or California, and, you know, and status quo. I think if you're really trying to be true to that vision, you know, then obviously it's going to require some sort of opportunity for people to be engaged in other places. And that different communities around the country have different food items, and we want to be able to celebrate that food wherever that may be. But I think to Sarah's point, the idea of kind of, you know, the traditional version of franchising probably doesn't appeal to us. But I think that we have something that seems like a little bit of a golden ticket of opportunity, and we want to have that, you know, chance to be embraced in other places around the country too, particularly where it's welcome, because I think the need for it is certainly high. Yeah.
So thank you. It was really interesting, and I was excited to see that you're interested in talking about food waste, because that's something that I study a lot, something that we work on here at the Missile Center. And what I've heard in the food waste world is that we need to think about farm to fork, but we also have to think about fork to farm. And I'm curious what you're thinking about, like how you engage with that while you're feeding people food. Because I'll tell you that at all the food waste events that I go to, people are so careful to eat every single thing in front of them when we know we're talking about food waste. So how do you engage with that like really kind of delicate topic that makes people feel kind of uncomfortable when you want them to enjoy what they're eating and also not?
Yeah,
We already do that right now with our last stop of child hunger, and then out here, here comes your lovely dessert prepared by James Beard Award winning pastry chef Ilma Lopez. Here you go.
It's a really good question, and I think I think we'll have to really think about what kind of narrative we want to put together that doesn't turn people off, but says, like, you know, we're just trying to get people to really think differently about these issues. We want you certainly to enjoy this food, and then walk away with this maybe a little bit different thought process, but we're very thoughtful about the language that we use. That we don't want it, again, we don't want it to be too dry and academic. We don't want it to come off too heavy-handed. We don't want it to, to turn anyone away. And so we're very, very careful. And I don't mean dry and academic in a negative sense by any means whatsoever. But
maybe we'd love to talk with you, about that. I mean, that's something that we're hoping to maybe tap into. That's not an area of our expertise, and we'd like to learn more about that and to weave that in. I mean, sometimes when we're talking about the food system, we kind of save these bigger issues we have been for kind of the last stop in a way that it's kind of bringing things all together and what that sort of charges for people to take forward and to think about and to continue that dialogue. I think we're also thinking about ways we want to start doing like a quarterly newsletter or figure out a way to do more promoting of events that are happening around the state for people to go and learn more, to take that next step. So maybe there's a piece that we can like tease out in it, and then people start to kind of receive more things from us. And so we're just kind of in this next year thinking about who to connect with to start, putting more of those pieces out there to kind of be that hub for them. So.
You told us the median age, and then you said that you wanted to reach out to like a younger generation. What is the step to getting like someone like me to do the tour? Like, why we aren't there to visit?
I think some of it probably has to do with in our first year. It is from 11 until 2, so you might not be able to take that unless it's a Saturday that you're signing up for. But that's a really great question. We've many people say that actually the amount we charge probably isn't covering sort of what sort of the food quality and education that we're doing, but we're very careful of not making it to a price point that is prohibitive. So I think that we're starting to try to do that other tour next year of the kind of farm to bottle and bites. It won't be 3 hours, it'll be 2 hours. It'll be closer to that happy hour evening time. And so we're still going to cover the Maine food system, but maybe in a way that it's like a first entree to that, but then you're still kind of connected to all of those events and newsletters and research we promote, and then maybe there's something that you want to take a deeper dive. But we're open to any suggestions. I mean, I would say that we're trying to get into these platforms like Instagram and these other various sort of pieces. But I think it'd be something that is really fascinating to people. I just think that it's just kind of tapping into that sort of educational piece while you're on vacation, and maybe a drink or two would help too.
I think just thinking about marketing and branding, and are we intersecting with people of a wide range of different ages? And I think what we have now, it probably caters to more the individual or family or couple that's come up to Maine for a weekend, a little getaway, and they want this experience to be a part of that. And that doesn't necessarily always reflect a younger audience. So I think it's how do we, make sure that what we have to offer is being presented to audiences that are above and beyond that as well. And that's something we're continuing to look at.
So I won't be surprised if there's quite a few more questions, and I hope they'll come up. But I'm mindful that some people have to head off to other classes and things. So let's thank Sarah.
Thank you all
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you. Maybe I just make one last quick point is that I think that Sarah and I both love sustainability. We both love systems thinking, and we really try to think creatively about how we could utilize those backgrounds, those experiences into creating our own business in a way that maybe hasn't really necessarily been replicated in this way before. And we just always try to find, new creative ways of thinking the things that we care so much about, which all of you care so much about, and how do you make professional opportunities out of them as well.